Good evening. Welcome to ICBS 2013 lecture series. And this time we are very glad to invite Dr. Jiang Wu, who comes way from Arizona, to give us the lecture series on the topic of the world of the Chinese Buddhist canon. And let me give you a brief introduction of Dr. Jiang Wu. He is an associate professor at the East Asian Buddhist Department of East Asian Buddhist Studies, Department of East Asian Studies at the University of Arizona, and he's specialized in Tan Buddhism, or what you are familiar with is Zen Buddhism, and also the Chinese Buddhist canon. And he's also an expert in Sino-Japanese Buddhist exchange. And what is more is that he is a very special skill that not most of the Buddhist scholars would have that kind of knowledge. That is a spatial analysis on the data of religions and culture. Okay, and he has published books on Tan Buddhism, and also another book about Chinese Buddhist canon will be published maybe by the end of this year. Okay. And today, our lecture series in total, we will have 8 sessions, and then we will finish that in 4 days. So each day, today we are going to have 2 sessions. And because of time, we will have Dr. Jiang Wu to give us a 60 minutes lecture first, and then as usual we will have 30 minutes question and answer for the on-site student and online student. And after that we have a small break, and then continue the second session. And the first session will be an overview of the canon tradition in East Asian Buddhism. The second session will be the canon in Chinese popular culture, Tripitaka in Journey to the West, or 西游记. Please join me in welcome Dr. Jiang Wu.
Thank you, Venerable Jue and all the audience here. It's my great pleasure to be here again. And I must say, I'm a totally unqualified teacher of the Chinese Buddhist canon, because here, what we're talking about is a great tradition spread all over East Asia. And we're talking about a collection of texts, which amounts to probably thousands of volumes. So that today, what I want to do is to introduce you to this great tradition. So I want to apologize, actually, right in the beginning. During my lecture, in my slides, there are probably mistakes and errors, right? So we will correct those later. But today, I want to make this experiment, because although we have been doing studies on the Chinese Buddhist canon for some years, but I never offer a class in such kind of scope to any audience. Right? We did offer a graduate level seminar course on the Chinese Buddhist canon. Right? So today, what I'm trying is completely new. Right? I'm not sure if anybody in other institutions actually teach such a course. But however, today, let's go from there. And as Dr. Jie already announced, we're going to have 2 lectures for today and 6 more in the next 3 or 4 days. And before I begin all of this, I want to give you a little bit of orientation about the subject we're covering today. So this lecture is actually very basic questions about why we're here, why we study canon. So the questions such as why the canon? We have lots of other topics to study in Buddhism, in East Asian Buddhism, or why suddenly we're interested in canon. There's a reason for this. And the second reason is about the location. Why here? We're teaching such a course. The third one, I want to tell you some personal story about my connection to the canon. The reason why I have been involved in the canon study, it starts from some years ago. 10, 11 years ago when I first started my job at Arizona. Last, we will talk about some kind of requirement or logistic issue, right, to make this series successful. So first, I want to talk about the reasons why we need to study the canon. Right? So I feel in the academic studies, there's a great danger to abstract the canon as pure research tool. Right? We all know what a canon is about, and we all know how to use that. Right now, we can go search online, right? Find the title and read it, even download to an iPad. But however, when we do that, what we're missing is actually the rich information, historical information behind those texts, right, for canon. So what I'm saying is that when you have abstract, when you absorb the content, we're losing some very important historical information, right, we need to keep. And also, right, as I mentioned, there are digital canons available right now, right? So it's a very easy and handy for us to get those texts and search for those texts we want, right? As I said, this is a abstraction, but however, also provide lots of convenience and also advantage for us to study the canon. Right? Because of the creation of digital canon, as I said, right, we're facing a great danger of losing many historical canons, right? Those canons which have been made in history. That's usually the case. When you have a new canon, the previous canon, because they worn out, because they've been used up, there's no more blocks available, then nobody care about that. So people send them the blocks probably to some places to burn to save some money, or people simply destroy that, right? Distribute that to the garbage. So that's truly a very important issue, because the first printed canon, right, when we talk about the first printed canon, we have only 12 volumes, right? To think about that, the entire 5,000 volumes, only we have about 12, right? So in the long time of the history, because of the new canons they have been produced, of course, the new things are always better, right? But however, the old things need to be kept as well. And so that's the duty of our Buddhist teachers and students to take care of the canonical tradition in East Asia. Right? What I'm saying here is kind of responsibility for us as scholars and students, right, to care about the canon, right? Not just the new thing, right, the digital canon, but also those canon traditions which have appeared in history, exerted a great impact on East Asian Buddhism. In addition to that, I think we also need to develop some kind of intimacy with the canon and the Buddhist texts, because this kind of texts or the format of the canon actually exists as physical objects. Right? For example, in my hand, I'm holding this scroll. Right? If I don't tell you, probably nobody knows what it is. But actually, it's a printed book. Right? If I unscroll that, you will see is actually Chinese characters printed on it. Right? So this is a reproduction of one volume of a Buddhist canon, So in this lecture series, we're going to study things like this. The physical aspects of the canon is actually very interesting, right? Very interesting. So why here? Right? So then you can recognize this famous monk. That's Master Xingyun, the founder of this university. Master Xingyun actually cared about the canon tradition a lot. You can see in the Foguang tradition, a complete set of canon, a new canon, has been compiled. Right? So this canon, I remember last time when we had the conference, Master Yikong actually introduced this canon to us. He is actually one of the compilers. And the Dr. Louis Lancaster, of course. So I've been with Dr. Louis Lancaster for many years. Actually, lots of his ideas inspired me. For example, the canon study. We know he is definitely the pioneer in this country to start the Buddhist canon study, such as Korean canon and also the stone canon in Fengshan. So my career, I would say, largely inspired by Dr. Louis Lang's study. Right? So Venerable Jieji mentioned I have some other interesting spatial analysis that actually is related to Dr. Lancaster's study as well, because Dr. Lancaster, for many years, had been working on the digital database and to apply the new technology to Buddhist study. And inspired by Dr. Louis Lancaster, we actually organized the international conference. Right? So we organized a conference in 2011 at the University of Arizona. And this conference is about overall examination about the Canon tradition, its formation and the transformation. Right? So we also organized talks to introduce the Canon to the common audience, and exhibition, for example, right? And then we have the second conference, right? So lots of you can recognize, right? It happened here during the March, and Dr. Jieji and Dr. Rongda Rui, we all together and organized this conference. And here, that's the reason I'm here. Right? So what I'm talking about here, when you trace back all these events, there's a reason, right? So why we need to study Buddhist Canon, why we need to study here, right? Because there are lots of resources which have been built up here, right? And then I want to tell a personal story about myself, right? So why I like to study Buddhist Canon. So I call this the Canon and me. I want to use this example to let you know what the Canon is look like, and also what kind of knowledge which are involved in doing Canon research. When I first arrived at Arizona 10 years ago, there's a lady present me 2 wood blocks. Right? So these are wood blocks she could not understand because there are Chinese characters, Japanese kana carved on those blocks. So when she asked me, we were in the East Asian study, so people asked me to do some weird things. For example, to identify antiques. Right? So people bring antiques, they want us to identify exactly what period it came from. Right? So I did some research on this, right? And according to this old lady, right, Miss Barker, she said that she has relatives traveled to Japan and brought back these blocks. Right? So later, the result of my research is that actually one of the blocks was coming from a Japanese book. And I later searched, actually this book exists at Harvard Engine Library, still there. So I went to Harvard Engine Library, went to their rare collection and pulled out the book. And turned to the page, the exact page which has been printed out from the block I have. So here is the block. So if you look at this block, this is a typical wood block. Right? So usually we see the paper, but however we don't see the blocks. Right? Because blocks, when you've got a paper, why you need the blocks? Unless you want to print more copies. Right? So this block, if you look at that, then you probably don't understand Chinese or Japanese. So this is a Japanese text printed on a block. You can see different columns. Right? And if you don't understand some basic knowledge about printing, East Asian printing history, you probably don't know where to start with. But however, if you understand how a book was made in East Asian tradition, you will look at the center first, because you will identify the title right there. Right? So this is a title which indicated it is something related to 四教义, right? The 4 teachings. Right? At that time, I have no idea what it's about. Right? What it's about. Right? And you just do some research and find out that actually it comes from this book. Right? The title matches this book. Right? Actually, it's written by a Japanese book. Right? It is actually a commentary, a sub-commentary of a commentary of a Korean monk's work. Right? So here is the page I copied matches exactly the block I have, right? The block which has been presented to me. And then I have some research notes, right? So this title is called Shikyugi Shichu Hanjitan, right? Hanjitan, right? What it means is that, right, it is a sub-commentary, right, of a commentary of a work called the Four Teachings, Four Teachings. Furthermore, research shows actually this work has been written by a Korean monk called Chikwan, right? Chikwan. And he has been an envoy dispatched by the Korean king to send back lost works written by the patriarch of the Tiantai tradition in China. So what happened is that during the 11th century, lots of such kind of Tiantai works had been lost in China. So Chinese kings, emperors sent a request to Korean and asked for those texts. And Shikwan was entrusted with such a mission, but he stayed in China and became a disciple of a Chinese master. Later he wrote this book, which is a commentary, right, which is an elaboration of a basic teaching of the Tiantai school. And people discovered this only after he died. It turned out to be a great work, and many Chinese monks, right, choose to write commentaries on this work. Turned out to be this Japanese author. Right? He was actually a monk, lived during the end of the Bakufu period, right? The late 19th century. And he wrote this book, and it was published by a Japanese printer. So this summer, I had the opportunity to visit Japan. Right? So I'm doing study at Manpukuji, at Iwuji. I examined lots of the printed texts during the Edo period, and I noticed that actually this printer actually was very active, during the Edo period, right? In the Edo period. So the result is actually very interesting because we see this book, right? So let me go to some kind of further notes on this book and the purpose of this course, right? So this book shows a very interesting history of the Chinese Buddhist text. Right? By the way, after my research, I noticed that this is not a text coming from the Canon, right? Because we have some other criterion and physical marks we can use to identify that. We didn't find that. Right? But however, we know that for any serious study of Chinese Buddhist text, it involves not only China but also Korean and Japan. So this lecture series, my purpose is try to introduce the history of Chinese Buddhist canon in the East Asian context. I already showed that in the example I had. And also study the Buddhist textual culture through the lens of the canon formation and transformation. So our question includes where the canon comes from. Right? So why are the Chinese suddenly interested in making a canon? Right? And also gain the deeper knowledge about East Asian culture and the history. Right? So in this lecture series, not only you will learn the basic techniques for making the canon, for example, the basic knowledge about the canon, the content and the structure, but also we're going to learn East Asian culture and history through the perspectives of canon making. Right? Because when canon was made, lots of historical information have been contained in the canon, right? In the canon itself. Right? So in this way, when we are talking about Chinese Buddhist canon, right, I want to clarify here, it doesn't mean the kind of a Buddhist canon which is produced in China, but rather it means, right, if you can read the Chinese, it means the Buddhist canon which is written in classical Chinese. Right? So if you know the Chinese, it's much clearer, but when we translate that into English, a little bit ambiguous, right? Right? So this topic, which means the Chinese Buddhist canon, will involve, if we refer to the geographical regions, right, will include knowledge about China, Japan, and also Korea. Right? Maybe in the future we will include Vietnam as well. Actually, it's a very important tradition. Right? But although at this point, I'm not aware of any scholar who's doing study on the Vietnamese canon. Right? We know the Vietnamese did not produce their own canon, but however, canon has been circulated in Vietnam. Right? No doubt about that. So that's the scope of this course. Right? Geographically speaking, we will cover this East Asian regions, right? East Asian regions. And the content of the course, I want to just repeat some of the introduction I've written for this course. Right? So immediately we're going to have lecture 1, right, which provides an overview of the canon. Right? And then the lecture 2, 3, and 4, we're going to focus first on something about mentality. Right? So what kind of mentality people have when they encounter the canon. Right? So this is something we shouldn't forget, because the canon is not a dead tradition. Right? It involves interaction with people. Right? So when people interact with the canon, what people think about the canon. Right? When you heard about the canon, when you have such kind of object, what kind of relationship people can develop with the canon. Right? So we're going to investigate it from a couple of perspectives. Right? So the fun part of tonight's lecture is actually lecture 2. Right? The second part of tonight's lecture series, we're going to actually study a little bit about the journey to the West. I'm not sure if anybody kind of know this great masterpiece. It's a very funny kind of a story, lots of them, right? And lots of drama, TV series made of that. Right? But however, we're going to use that for studying the canon. And then we move to imagination. Right? So the Chinese imagination about the canon based on reading translated Buddhist scriptures from India. And also we're going to discuss the phenomenon of what I call the cult of the canon. The canon became the subject, the object for worshiping. For worshiping. So these are the first 4 lectures. And we have lecture 5, which will focus on technology. As we know, making canon is not an easy task. Right? It actually involves tremendous human power and also technology support, like money, of course. Right? So we're going to investigate those aspects. I think it's very important. Right? And at the end, right, so the last 3 lectures, we're going to study some cases. Right? Here I select some most important cases in East Asian canonical tradition. Right? They are all printed canon, by the way. Right? So the 3 I selected, they're all printed canon. The first one is called Kaibao canon. Right? If you don't know the term, what the term Kaibao means, Kaibao refers to the reign name, right? So the ruler's name of the Song dynasty. Right? In the Song dynasty, the first founding emperor, right? When they founded his own dynasty, right? He gave the reign, right? So the rulership, right? He had during that time as Kaibao. Right? So this canon was produced exactly during his rulership. Right? So then that was named as Kaibao. Of course, there are some other names for this canon. So we're going to talk about that when we focus on Kaibao canon. Right? So then we will focus on the Korean canon, right? The Goryeo canon. Why we call this a Goryeo canon? Because this is produced during the Goryeo dynasty, right? A Korean dynasty. And last, we're going to focus on the Great Taisho canon. Right? So this is the greatest canon so far, made in Japan, and right now it's a standard for academic reference and study. Right? So if you do academic research, right? So this is going to be your indispensable tools for investigate the canon. Right? So there are lots of interesting stuff going on during the time when this canon was made. Okay? So we're not going to focus on the academic achievement of this canon, right? But we're going to put this canon back to its context, right? See how the canon was made in modern time, right? In modern time. So these are the basic kind of content of this lecture. And then I have kind of suggestions, not requirements, but I'm not going to require you to read the entire Buddhist canon. Right? So for sure, right? So nobody can do that. Actually, if you want to do that, people in the ancient time, they did that. Right? Let me tell you, 3 years. Right? If you don't do anything else, 3 years, you can read all the canon. Right? But of course, the Asian people, some of them who devoted to this practice, their purpose is not to obtain a PhD, right? So they want to use this as a devotion, right? It is a great devotion to Buddha's teaching, right? The Dhamma. So my suggestion is please attend all lectures if you can, right? And participate in class discussion. We're going to have a lectures, and after lecture we have about 30 minutes, right? We can discuss some issues about the canon. And I also designed some study questions after each lecture. Right? So if you have time, you can look at those questions. Maybe answering those questions can help you understand better what the Buddhist canon is. So of course, some of the questions probably we're going to cover in the later lectures. Right? But as I said, this is an experiment. Let's see how it goes. Okay? Thank you. So now I want to start lecture 1. Okay. So lecture 1 is an overview of the canon tradition in East Asian Buddhism. And I have a few objectives to achieve in this lecture. First, I want to give a definition of the canon. Right? Exactly what is the subject we're looking at. And how to define the scope of our research. Right? Second, right, so I want to provide a systematic overview of the canon history. Right? So exactly what kind of historical stages, periods, we can identify, and in those time periods, exactly what happened to the canon, right? What happened to the canon. Some other basic knowledge about, such as the format, printing related issues in the making of the canon. At the end, probably I will say briefly about our approaches to the study of the canon. Right? And then there might be kind of an overview, right, for some of the lectures. I already did that, right? But see if we have time, we can say more about that. Right? So what is the Chinese Buddhist canon? Right? So here, right, we're talking about a term, right, in Chinese called Da Zhang Jing, right, which appeared in the period between the Emperor Xuanzong, which is Tang Dynasty, and the Buddhist persecution during the Hui Chan Reign. So here we're talking about the time around the year 845, right, 845. So what happened during the year is that there's a Tang Dynasty emperor who hate Buddhism, right? So he ordered all Buddhist monks should return to the lay life, and the Buddhist monastery should be closed. Right? During that time, Buddhism was kind of persecuted, right? So this is a term we use. Right? And then the great Buddhist canon, right? You can see in this kind of persecution also suffered, right? Also suffered. So we can pinpoint to that time period, right? See a great invention of the term we call the Da Zhang Jing, right? So great Tripitaka, right? Great Tripitaka. So the Chinese who created the term Da Zhang Jing did not limit it to the meaning of the Chinese Buddhist canon, but actually used the term for all of the Buddhist literature, right? So here we have a definition problem, right? If the Chinese canon refers to all Buddhist literature, then there's no difference here, right? So you pick up a Buddhist text, then that should be included in the Buddhist canon, but actually it's not the case, right? It's not the case. Gradually, so the term evolved into what we call the Chinese Buddhist canon. So why is that the case? Because the translation process was almost finished during the late Tang Dynasty. So the Chinese understand Buddhism through translation. Right? So the great effort has been put in translating all those texts. So basically, the Chinese Buddhist canon took form because the essential part of the canon comprised of translated in Indian scriptures. Right? So this is the core of the canon. Right? This is the core of the canon. So here, I want to use a definition given by a Chinese scholar called Fang Guangchang. Right? And he has been working on the canon for many years, right? Very senior scholar. Right? And he studied the canon and tried to give a definition. Right? Here I just borrow his definition here. I see what he says here. The first sentence, what is Buddhist canon? Including basically the translated Buddhist scriptures of past ages as the core of the canon. Right? So this is something we have to remember. If we were to call a collection of Buddhist books or texts as the canon, the core of the canon has to be the translated Buddhist scriptures. Actually, in the beginning, in the formation age of the Chinese Buddhist canon, the Chinese only included, right, almost exclusively include only the translated Buddhist scriptures from India, right? Not the Chinese authors, right? Not the texts written by Chinese authors, right? Not considered to be worthy enough, right, to be included in the canon. So Chinese Buddhist canon is basically a collection of the Chinese Buddhist classics and the related literature. So why it says related literature? Because not simply scriptures, right, being included in the canon, but also we all know Vinaya, for example, right, precepts, and also commentaries related to scripture. They're included. But in addition to that, actually, the Chinese Buddhist canon includes something else, right, such as the writings written by those who hate Buddhism. Right? For example, they debate with Buddhists in India, but however, their works have been preserved by the Buddhists and later incorporated into Buddhist canon. Geography, for example, biography. So the variety of different kind of literature which have been included into the Chinese Buddhist canon. So this is why we use this kind of broader definition, not just the Buddhist classics, but also related literature. Right? So this kind of related literature actually very interesting. Right? Sometimes can provide a very rare angle for us to study Asian culture. Right? Some traditions, religious traditions, which later just perished. There's no traces of their existence, but however, right now if we study Buddhist canon carefully, we actually can find sources related to this kind of traditions. Right? So this is the value of Chinese Buddhist canon for studying the broader cultural traditions. But however, this kind of a collection, if you simply put Buddhist texts together, that's not a canon. That's not a canon, right? Not a library, right? Maybe a storage room, because a canon must have has certain kind of structures to organize its content. Right? So that's why the last sentence is so important. Right? It has a structure created with some external identification markers. Right? Something, when you look at that, for example, I have some example here, right? I can identify some examples belongs to a Buddhist canon, but some are not, or some are not, right? For example, you can see this kind of a format, if I put it up, right, and wrote this kind of a book, if we call it a book, right, it has certain kind of a physical characteristics, which will tell us, if we have enough knowledge, it will tell us if this belongs to a Buddhist canon. Right? So these require some specialized knowledge. So today, in my future lectures, we try to investigate some of them. So let's go back to this definition. I want to read it again. Let's think about what are the essential elements here we need to pay attention to. So in the future, when we study the canon, we need to pay attention to this basic elements. Right? So including basically the translated Buddhist scriptures of past ages as a core of the canon. The Chinese Buddhist canon is a collection of the Chinese Buddhist classics and the related literature organized according to certain structures and created with some external identification markers. Right. So here there are some key points. Right. I want to once again point it out. Right. So we have to always remember the canon we're talking about is an organized collection. There are always organization. Right. Scholars spend a lot of time trying to figure out how a canon has been organized. And it's a carefully compiled canon assembles important texts in Buddhist tradition. And also, right, so these texts acquired significant textual and spiritual authority. For those texts which have been included in canon, they attain kind of authority, right? So there are some texts which are excluded from the canon. Right? So this is kind of a saying, okay, this kind of texts are not worthy of being put into the canon, right? Or there's some very complicated reason. We cannot say simply based on content, right? Maybe that's because a emperor, right, so who sponsored the project, he doesn't like the text, right? So the cases we have found the cases like this. And also, the whole set of canon, right, has become the object of worship and devotion. Right? So this is why we devoted one lecture on the topic of the cult of the canon. Right? So actually, the canon exists as a physical object. Right? So this is something we need to keep in mind. So the canon, right, to catalog, to identify each individual text. However, the reality is that they need to find the system which provide a unique identity to a single text. So then they try different ways. Of course, the numerical number is one way, but they don't have the Arabic number writing, the way of writing number at that time. So when you write Chinese character 1099, that's probably 4 characters. Right? That take up space. So this is my speculation. Right? So that might be the reason when you write number that could be very long. But however, if you use one character, that character immediately gives you the position of this text in the entire system. Of course, you have to memorize the 1,000 characters, right? So otherwise, it doesn't make any sense. And nowadays, one of the difficult things for us to study the canon is that we have to keep looking, right? So which number, which character converts to the numerical system. Right? You have to convert that, and then identify that and compare with the text in other canons. So this is my speculation about why the 1,000 character system has been adopted. And the Chinese, by the way, the Chinese always use a popular text as a way to count the number or to form a structure. For example, the classics of filial piety, before the creation of 1,000 character essay, has been used as a way to arrange text or arrange numbers. So this is not new in the Chinese tradition.
Okay, I've got another question from the online audience. As you have pointed out some of the various editions of the canon throughout the time and across boundaries, the question is, are there differences in even those common texts that most, if not all, canon editions share? So are there common and differences but mostly that they share?
Yeah, you're right. Actually, if you find a particular individual text in different canon traditions, very likely there are going to be discrepancies. Some major discrepancies, some minor discrepancies. So that's why, right, in newer edition of the canon, there always required a significant effort which is devoted to collation. Compare different traditions and find out which edition is the best. Right? So that involves a lot of scholarship. Right? In the future, we're going to use the Korean canon as an example. Right? We will see a collation notes has been made by a Korean monk for the purpose of creation of the Goryeo canon. Because the mother copy, Goryeo canon based upon, is exactly the Kaipo canon. So what this Korean author found out is that the Kaipo canon is full of mistakes. So the texts they identified and they compare with the Kidan canon, the northern tradition, and they found out actually there are lots of mistakes. This also reflects the unstability of the manuscript, because the manuscript has been handwritten by a scribe. Who knows what that scribe wrote? Maybe that person falling to sleep or omit the complete session of the text. Right? So that quite often happens when we look at the manuscript copies. So the printed version has lots of advantage. Right? So one of the advantages is that actually it fixes a text. Right? It's got printed whenever there's a copy which has been printed from the block, it's going to be identical. But however, if you have manuscripts which has been handwritten by different kind of people, you can imagine what having typos, right? Different kind of mistakes, even completely different kind of content. With the same title, but the content will be different. So that happened. Right? So why the Kaipo canon has so many problems? One of the reasons is that it's the first printed canon which must be based on a manuscript edition. So depending on what kind of manuscript edition it is based on, we don't know exactly what the text, the quality of the text is going to be. So I hope I answered this question.
Do we have articles of Muslim?
Do we have what?
Muslim.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
I actually wanted to ask, which areas of the canon still need to be translated into English? And in your opinion, which ones should take priority?
That's hard. I would say it's hard, right? There are efforts, there are indeed such kind of initiative, which intend to translate the entire canon, or at least to create a canon in English version. So far, there are efforts, but I don't know the details about those efforts. I think it's going to be in the future to see some texts translating to English. But once again, as I said, simply translate text into English is not a canon, right? Because it's only the first step. If you look at the Chinese experience, because after the accumulation of translated text, the next question is how to organize those texts. Are you going to follow the Chinese way, the Japanese way, Korean way, or you want to create a unique way of classification which reflect the European, the Western view of the Buddhist tradition? Right? So all these questions, I think, are brand new for the Buddhist communities here, right? And it got to be solved here, right, in the West. Okay, so one more question?
You mentioned about the apocryphal text.
Yes.
So can you share with us a little bit the knowledge or some technique that help us to identify the apocryphal text,
Okay, yeah.
and how the apocryphal text circulate at that time in China? Okay, yes, thank you.
So apocryphal text is a very interesting topic. So actually, there are lots of studies have been put in this area. Right? So I regularly taught classes such as Introduction to History of East Asian Buddhism. So then we actually examine the apocryphal texts. Apocryphal texts, by the way, right? You think that's not authentic, but however, these texts are tremendously popular. Right? The reason why they're popular because they appeal to the Chinese audience. They use the terminology or language which the ordinary Chinese can understand. They refer to the Chinese belief system, right? And take care of the concern of the Chinese. Right? For example, right, we examine apocryphal scriptures such as the scripture of filial songs, right? 孝子经, right? Or 父母恩宠经, right? the sutra on the difficulty to repay the kindness of parents. All these texts are very short. It's short, but however, say very directly to the filial songs. If you want to fulfill your filial piety, remember filial piety is the number one virtue in China. Right? You got to do this and this. And very often, the filial piety, the sutra of this kind, Apocryphal Sutra, address the virtue of filial piety and directly direct the filial piety towards the mother. Because in the Confucian tradition, mothers, right, are not being taken care of very well. Right? So Buddhist apocryphal scriptures created our audience by appeal them to pay attention to the mother. Right? So you will see, if you read a couple of the texts, you will see the mother, right? The female figures, right? Occupy the central place because they nourish the children, but however, they were neglected in the Confucian tradition. So, but however, if you look at the scriptures from the Buddhist perspective, then obviously you have a question such as how can Buddha, in a long time ago, already take care of the issue, and why in such kind of scripture there are so many categories or even place names mentioned. Right? These are all the Chinese place names or Chinese values. So these are some kind of the issues we identify, but doesn't mean the Apocryphal Sutras are not popular. They're actually tremendous popular, right? Such as the Sutra of Difficulty of Repaying the Kindness of the Parents, tremendous popular even today, right? In the Buddhist community, well, we know for sure it's apocryphal, but it just speak out, right, about the Chinese concerns for the virtue of filial piety. Is that okay? Okay, yeah, thank you very much. Right, so I think we conclude the first lecture. Right, thank you for attending. Thank you.